Okay, so you sent this over Section 321 of the Forge D Act, and I gotta say, it's pretty interesting stuff.
Yeah, it's a big one for sure. It's going to have some major ripple effects.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah.
So we're going to try to break it all down for everyone today, right? Kind of like translating it all from government jargon into, plain English.
Exactly. Make it clear what it means for how the DoD buys its tech. How they're going to be doing things differently.
Right, because they will be doing things differently. So that's kind of our mission today, figuring out what this new way of buying tech looks like and what it means for, the bigger picture.
And what the impacts might be. The potential upsides, the potential downsides, the whole 9 yards.
Exactly. And you gave me a ton of great sources to work with for this. Analysis, document stuff, straight from .gov websites, even a Congressional Research Service report.
Oh, yeah, the CRS is always a goldmine of information.
It really is. So we got a lot to dig into. But as we do, I want everyone listening to keep one big question in mind. How is this going to change how quickly and efficiently our military gets the stuff it needs? The tech, the tools, everything.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
And
that's the whole point of this, right? Getting the right tech into the right hands faster and smarter.
Exactly. Okay, so let's jump into it. Section 321. What's the big headline here? What's the fundamental change it's trying to make?
Well, the big shift is this idea of consumption-based acquisition. It's a whole new way of thinking about how the DoD buys things.
Consumption-based. So like instead of buying, a whole system up front, they pay for it as they use it.
It's kind of like think about your electricity bill. You pay for the kilowatt hours you use, not the whole power plant.
Okay, so instead of buying the whole satellite, they're paying for the bandwidth they actually consume.
Exactly. It's about paying for what you use when you use it.
So it's a pretty radical departure from the old way of doing things right, like buying a fighter jet outright versus paying per flight hour or something.
It's a huge shift.
Yeah.
And it's not just talk either. They're baking this into the law and the regulations.
Oh, yeah. The analysis pointed that out. Section 321 actually adds a whole new section to Title 10 of the U.S. Code.
Right. Section 3459. And it specifically authorizes these consumption-based solutions. It's the legal foundation for the whole thing.
So it's not just a policy change. It's literally written into the law. Now they're serious.
And to make sure it actually happens, they're changing the DFARS too. That's the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement. It's like the DoD's rule book for buying stuff.
So they're adding a whole chapter on consumption-based acquisition to their rule book.
Yep. They're creating a new subcategory for it, making it official.
Okay, so new law, new rules, but they're also creating a new type of contract, right? Something called a fixed price resource units.
That's another key piece of this puzzle. Now, it might sound a little confusing at first, fixed price, when we're talking about paying based on how much you use.
Yeah.
But it actually makes sense.
Okay, break it down for me. How can it be fixed price if you're paying for what you consume?
So the idea is that the price per unit is fixed. Like let's say you're buying cloud computing power. The cost per hour of processing time would be set in the contract.
Okay, so the unit price is locked in, but the total cost depends on how much you use.
Precisely. You might use 10 hours one month and 50 hours the next. The total bill changes, but the hourly rate stays the same.
So it's like predictable unpredictability.
In a way, yeah. They're trying to get the flexibility of consumption-based buying, but with some built-in cost control.
Makes sense. So we've got this new philosophy, the legal backing, the regulations, and even a new contract type. But the big question is why now? What's driving this huge shift?
Well, it's not like they just woke up one day and decided to do this. It's been building for a while. There's a whole history behind it.
Yeah, the sources you sent definitely highlighted that. Like the traditional way of doing things just wasn't cutting it anymore.
Especially with technology changing so fast.
All right.
The old system was designed for buying big things like tanks and ships, not so much for software and digital services.
The analysis mentioned that even the history.defense.gov website talks about how those post-World War II contracting frameworks weren't built for the kind of tech we have today.
Exactly. They were made for a different era, a different kind of military procurement.
And we've seen the problems that's caused, right, like huge delays in getting new tech into the field.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The GAO, the Government Accountability Office, has been calling them out on this for years.
Yeah, they've issued all sorts of reports criticizing the DoD for taking way too long to buy things like cloud computing services.
And it's not just the GAO. Congress has been pushing for change, too. Remember back in 2016, the National Defense Authorization Act really emphasized the need for more commercial-style buying practices.
Right. They wanted the DoD to be more agile, more like a tech company, basically.
Exactly. And the Defense Science Board chimed in, too. They've been talking about the benefits of metering for ages, tracking and measuring how much of something you're actually using.
So this idea of consumption-based acquisition has been brewing for a while.
It has.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not like the DoD hasn't tried it before. They've dabbled with as-a-service models in the past.
Like the JDI cloud thing, right? That was a big deal.
Exactly. But the problem was they didn't really have the legal authority to do it on a large scale. It was more like experimentation.
So Section 321 is like giving them the green light, making it official and saying, go for it.
It's codifying this shift that's been in the works for years. It's taking decades of reform efforts and turning them into law.
And it's interesting, the analysis pointed out that Senator Roger Wicker was the one who introduced this back in December of 2024.
Yep, it was part of a bigger bill, S.568, aimed at modernizing defense acquisition.
So it's not just some random thing. It's part of a larger effort to revamp the whole system.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This is a big deal. It's a real sea change in how the DoD is approaching tech acquisition.
Okay, so we've talked about the why, the what's behind this big change. Now let's get into the what. What are they hoping to achieve with this new consumption-based approach?
Well, the analysis lays out 5 main goals they're aiming for, 5 big wins they're hoping to see.
Okay, let's hear them. What's the best case scenario here? What's the DoD's dream outcome?
First and foremost, it's about flexibility. Right now, the DoD often gets locked into big contracts for systems that might become obsolete quickly.
Right, technology moves so fast these days. What's cutting edge today might be outdated tomorrow.
Exactly. So with consumption-based acquisition, they can scale their usage up or down as needed. They only pay for what they actually use.
So if a new technology comes along that's better, they can switch more easily without being stuck with a bunch of expensive legacy systems.
Precisely. That's the flexibility they're after. The second big win is simplification. They want to make the whole buying process faster and less bureaucratic.
The dreaded bureaucracy. Always a good thing to streamline that.
Right, so they're creating this dedicated subcategory in the DFARS for consumption-based solutions. It's like a fast track for these types of contracts.
So less paperwork, less red tape, just get the tech where it needs to go quicker.
That's the goal. And then the third win is about cost predictability. Now, we talked about those fixed price resource units earlier.
Right, the idea that the unit price is set, but the total cost varies based on usage.
Exactly. So even though the overall bill might fluctuate, they'll know exactly how much each unit of consumption costs.
So it's not like they'll suddenly get hit with some huge unexpected bill.
Right. There's a level of predictability built into the system. The fourth goal is all about budgeting. They want more flexibility there, too.
So instead of needing a massive chunk of money up front, they can fund things incrementally.
Exactly. They can pay as they go, which means they don't have to make these huge budget commitments years in advance.
That makes a lot of sense, especially when you're dealing with technologies that are constantly evolving.
And the final big win they're hoping for is increased transparency. They want to know exactly how these resources are being used.
So they're going to require usage notifications from the contractors, right? Like reports on how much of the service is being consumed. Exactly. That way they can track where the money's going and make sure things are being used efficiently.
So it's like accountability built into the system. All right, so more flexibility, simpler processes, predictable costs, adaptable budgeting, and greater transparency. Those are some pretty ambitious goals.
They are. And on paper, it sounds great. But as with anything in government, there are always potential downsides, things that could go wrong.
Yeah, the analysis definitely didn't shy away from those potential pitfalls.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that could trip them up?
Well, the first one that jumps out is cost overruns. Even though the unit prices are fixed, if usage spikes unexpectedly, the total bill could still go way up.
Right, so it's like your cell phone bill. You have a fixed rate per minute, but if you suddenly start making a ton of calls, you could end up with a nasty surprise.
Exactly. It's all about managing that consumption, making sure it stays within reasonable limits.
So they'll need some strong oversight mechanisms in place to prevent runaway costs. Absolutely. The second concern is about focus. The definition of what qualifies as a technology-supported capability under this new system is pretty broad.
So basically, almost anything tech-related could potentially be bought this way.
Pretty much. So the worry is that they might spread themselves too thin trying to apply this to everything.
It's like if you have a new shiny tool, you want to use it for everything, even if it's not the right tool for the job.
Exactly. They'll need to be really careful about setting priorities and defining clear eligibility criteria.
Otherwise, they risk diluting their efforts and wasting resources.
Precisely. Now, the third potential pitfall is reduced competition. They're worried about what happens when it's time to make changes to a system.
So like upgrades or modifications.
Right. Now, if you already have a system in place and you need to tweak it, It's often easiest to just go back to the original vendor.
Because they already know the system inside and out.
Exactly. But that could stifle competition. It might be cheaper or better to go with a different company, but they'll be tempted to stick with the incumbent.
The good old vendor lock-in problem.
Exactly. It can be really hard to break free once you're in that situation. And the fourth challenge they highlighted is budgeting paradoxically.
Wait, I thought they wanted more flexibility in budgeting. How is that a problem?
Well, incremental funding can be great for short-term agility, but it can make long-term planning really tough.
Because you don't know how much you'll need to budget for something years down the line.
Exactly. And if these incremental funding streams aren't properly integrated into the overall budget, it can create chaos.
So it's like they're trading one set of budgeting headaches for another.
In a way, yeah. And then the final concern is all about those usage notifications.
Right, the reports the contractors have to send in.
Exactly. It's a good idea in theory for transparency and accountability, but it could also create a huge administrative burden.
So imagine you're a contractor, you're trying to deliver this service, and on top of that, you have to constantly generate these detailed usage reports. It could really slow things down.
And if the notification thresholds are set too low, you could end up with a flood of reports that nobody has time to actually analyze.
So it's like a good idea that could backfire if it's not implemented carefully?
Precisely. So those are the 5 big potential pitfalls. Cost overruns, diluted focus, reduced competition, budgeting complications, and administrative burdens.
Okay, so that's a pretty daunting list of challenges. But the analysis also talks about how the DoD plans to mitigate these risks. What are they going to do to make sure this actually works?
Well, they've got a plan for each of those potential problems, a set of safeguards to try to keep things on track.
Okay, so for cost overruns, what's the solution?
They're going to implement usage caps, so you can't just keep consuming more and more without hitting a ceiling.
And I'm guessing they'll be doing regular cost reviews as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. They have to keep a close eye on those bills, make sure things aren't spiraling out of control.
Okay, what about the focus issue? How do they make sure they're not using this new approach for everything under the sun?
They're going to be very specific about what qualifies. They're going to define clear eligibility criteria for consumption-based solutions.
So not just any tech purchase can be done this way. It has to meet certain requirements?
Exactly.
Yeah.
They need to be strategic about where they apply this approach.
Okay, and what about competition? How do they prevent vendor lock-in and make sure they're always getting the best deal?
They're going to require periodic recompetition. So even if you're the incumbent, you can't just assume you'll get the contract for modifications or upgrades.
So they'll have to bid against other companies regularly to prove they're still the best option.
Exactly. Keeps everyone on their toes. And then for the budgeting conundrum, they've got a plan for that too.
Which is?
They're going to tightly integrate these incremental funding streams into the regular budget cycle.
So no more off-the-book spending. It all has to be accounted for in the annual budget process.
Exactly. And finally, to deal with the administrative burden of those notifications, they're going to automate as much as possible.
So less manual reporting, more automated systems that can track and generate those reports.
Precisely. That'll free up time and resources and hopefully prevent things from getting bogged down in paperwork.
Okay, so it sounds like they've really thought this through. They've identified the potential problems, and they've got plans in place to address them.
They're definitely not going into this blindly. They're trying to be proactive and get ahead of the challenges.
Now let's talk about the people involved. Who within the DoD is going to be most affected by this change?
Well, it's going to touch a lot of different roles, but some will feel it more than others.
Like the secretaries of the military departments, for example.
Oh, yeah. They're going to have a lot more on their plate. They'll be responsible for overseeing the implementation of this whole new system.
So more strategic oversight, making sure it all runs smoothly.
Exactly. And then the contracting officers, they're the ones who are actually going to be writing and managing these new types of contracts.
They're going to need some serious training on this.
They're going to need to become experts in consumption-based acquisition. They're going to need to understand the new DFARS regulations inside and out.
It's a whole new skill set they're going to have to develop.
And the program managers are going to have to adapt too. They're the ones who are responsible for delivering the capabilities.
So their job is going to be a lot more about managing consumption and making sure resources are being used efficiently.
Exactly. They'll need to track usage patterns, adjust service levels based on demand. It's a whole new way of thinking about program management.
And what about the money people, the financial officers?
They're in for a wild ride too. They're going to have to figure out how to handle these incremental funding streams.
And integrate them into the regular budget.
Exactly. It's going to require some serious flexibility and creativity on their part.
So a lot of people are going to have to learn new skills, adapt to new ways of working.
It's going to be a big adjustment for the whole DoD.
Now, whenever you have a big change like this, there are always going to be some people who aren't happy about it. Who are the potential naysayers here?
Well, the analysis points to a few groups who might push back.
Okay, let's start with the obvious one, the contractors. They're not always thrilled about change, are they?
Not always, especially when it comes to their bottom line.
Right. They like those big fixed price contracts. They know exactly how much money they're going to make.
Exactly. This new system introduces more uncertainty for them. They're not sure how much revenue they'll generate.
And they might have to revamp their whole business model to adapt.
Which is never fun. So there's definitely potential for pushback from the contractor community.
And what about Congress? They hold the purse strings after all.
Right. They're going to be watching this very closely. They want to make sure taxpayer dollars are being spent wisely.
And they might be skeptical about this whole consumption-based thing. They might worry about cost overruns and lack of control.
Absolutely. They're going to want to see some strong safeguards in place to make sure the DoD isn't just writing blank checks.
And then there are the auditors, right? They're the ones who have to make sure everything is above board.
They're going to have their work cut out for them.
Yeah.
This new system is more complex, more dynamic. It's going to be harder to track everything.
So they'll need new tools, new techniques to ensure accountability and prevent fraud.
Exactly. They're going to be under a lot of pressure to keep up with this change.
So it sounds like the potential for resistance is coming from concerns about money. Contractors worried about their profits, Congress worried about spending, and auditors worried about oversight.
Pretty much. It all boils down to that.
Okay, so let's say the DoD manages to overcome all those obstacles and actually implement this new approach. What are they going to need to make it work? What resources are essential?
Well, first and foremost, they're going to need a lot of money to build the infrastructure for all this.
Like the metering systems to track usage.
Exactly. They need to be able to accurately measure how much of each service is being consumed.
And that data needs to be reliable and accessible.
Absolutely. So that's a big investment right off the bat.
And then there's the training piece, right? All those people we talked about, the contracting officers, the program managers, they're all going to need to be brought up to speed.
Huge training effort. They need to understand these new contract types, the new DFARS regulations, everything.
They're basically building a whole new acquisition workforce.
In a way.
Yeah.
And finally, they're going to need more people to manage all this. More oversight, more monitoring, more compliance checks.
So they'll probably need to hire additional personnel to handle the increased workload.
Most likely. It's not going to be cheap or easy to implement this.
Okay, so money for infrastructure training for personnel and more people to manage it all, that's a pretty big ask.
It is. But if they want to make this work, they're going to have to invest the resources.
Okay, so assuming they do invest the resources, how are they going to know it's actually working? What are the metrics for success here?
Well, the analysis lays out a few key performance indicators they'll be tracking.
Okay, give me the highlights. What are they going to be measuring?
First and foremost, they're going to be looking at the adoption rate. How many contracts are actually using this consumption-based approach?
So are they setting a target for that? Like what percentage of contracts should be using this new model?
Yeah, they're aiming for a 20% increase in adoption after the new DFARS rules are fully in place.
Okay, so that's one benchmark. What else?
They're also going to be looking at cost savings. They want to see if this actually saves money compared to the old way of doing things.
Makes sense. Do they have a specific target for that?
They're aiming for a 10% reduction in costs, which is pretty ambitious.
It is. But hey, if they can pull it off, that's a big win.
And the final metric they're going to be tracking is speed. They want to see if this can get technology into the hands of the warfighter faster.
So are they measuring like delivery times?
Exactly. They're hoping to achieve a 15% reduction in delivery timelines.
So faster acquisition, faster deployment, that's the ultimate goal.
It is. And they're going to be monitoring all these metrics closely in the years after the DFARS is amended.
So it's a wait-and-see situation. We'll have to check back in a few years and see if they hit those targets.
Exactly. The proof is in the pudding, as they say.
All right, so to wrap this all up, it seems like Section 321 is a pretty big deal. It's a fundamental shift in how the DoD buys technology.
It really is. It's about moving away from big upfront purchases and towards a more flexible usage-based model.
And the goal is to be faster, more efficient, more adaptable to the rapidly changing world of technology.
Precisely. And while there are definitely some challenges and potential pitfalls, the DoD seems to be aware of them, and they've got plans in place to try to mitigate those risks.
So it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out in practice.
Absolutely. This is definitely one to watch.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive. It really makes you think about how other government agencies might be able to adopt similar approaches.
It does. I mean, if it works for the DoD, why not for other parts of the government?
Right. Like imagine if they could buy IT services this way or healthcare services or anything really.
It would be a huge change, but it could potentially save a lot of money and make things much more efficient.
Something to ponder for sure. Well, thanks for joining me today. This has been a great conversation.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And to everyone listening, thanks for tuning in to The Deep Dive. We'll see you next time.